You know, one of their best MPs was Dr. Sarah Wollaston of Totnes, which is a very green town in Devon, which I know and love well. And I spoke there a few months ago for opposing Brexit. And Sarah Wollaston is a real environmentalist. She understood, for instance, as a doctor, that all hospitals should have a flower garden because flowers can give therapeutic healing to patients. If you take patients who are in whatever illness out into the garden, let them spend time with the flowers, even planting and working with them, therapeutic gardens are part of the healing process. They have a miraculous effect, right? And they cut the budgets of hospitals a lot. I had a friend in that conference in Sopron in Hungary whose uncle was a pharmacologist in Brazil who worked with the shamans in the jungle of Brazil, in the Amazon. He went to them and said, what are the most important healing plants you have in your pharmacopoeia? And they said, well, this one and that vine and this root and this flower. And he said, do you mind if I come and study with you for a year? And he was a full-on professor, all kinds of degrees, but he had the humility to go and sit at the feet of these shamans in the jungle. And they taught him generously their knowledge. This plant does that, this one cures headaches, that one stops blindness, this one cures impotence, etc. He documented them all, and he took cuttings. He was allowed to by the shamans, the elders, and he took, with their blessings, he took them back to the lab in the university in Sao Paulo or wherever it was, and he grew them in a huge greenhouse the university enabled him to acquire. And he grew 500 plants from cuttings and roots and things, which he then watched, and he watched them grow over the next year or two. And then he analysed their chemical components. As a pharmacologist, he saw why this thing was going to be curing headaches, and why this one would cure blindness, and why this one would cure impotence. He could explain it in biochemical terms. And he published all this, and he called it the living pharmacy. And these 500 plants he then propagated. And with the approval of the academic authorities, but most importantly the Brazilian government, they then replicated these 500 plants, the living pharmacy, in other cities throughout Brazil. And every city in Brazil has a living pharmacy. Now the point is the medicines of this living pharmacy, 500 of them, can cure 99% of diseases that the average Brazilian gets at a tiny fraction of the cost that going to the conventional doctor and getting pills, which are patented and run by big drug companies, would charge. So what it means is that for the poor and for the people that want to avoid nasty side effects, they go to the living pharmacy, and for a few pence you get your illness cured. Anyway, this is a brilliant example, and this is a famous story. There was a brilliant documentary about it, and he was given the equivalent of a knighthood by the Brazilian government for this work. I don't think he's alive anymore, sadly, but his nephew I met. And the work lives on. Now, I think we could replicate that in Britain and Ireland and France and Hungary and Germany and Europe as a whole. Where are the 500 living plants in Europe that can treat and heal the diseases of most Europeans? Because they do exist. Things like nettles, just common plants, thistles, whatever, they have therapeutic qualities. And as an eco-philosopher, I would say it makes absolute common sense to develop, cultivate and grow these 500 healing plants, just as they've done in Brazil. And talk to the holders of the natural knowledge, the druids, the sages of the different European cultures, which still possess the knowledge of these healing plants, and they still do. And if you, there's some excellent books you can get about this. One of my friends, Philip Cargom, a Druid elder, produced a wonderful set of cards about healing plants, which gives the Druidical take on them. Well worth seeing. So I think that's the way to go, that eco-development of Europe as an ecosystem for us all, living in peace, getting rid of all the nuclear weapons that are here, all the toxic factories pumping out chemicals. We have to green this continent. with new knowledge, higher order, sustainable technology and sustainable industrial development. I want to see alternative energies come into main use so that electricity and so on generated by sustainable energy supplies. And I think scientists should be doing more. CERN does a great job, but we need the equivalent of CERN to look into non-nuclear sustainable energy sources, gravity waves, and other ways of generating what's called zero-point energy. There's a lot of information now that it's possible to generate electricity in ways that don't cause pollution and don't lead to radioactive waste and so on. The scientists of Europe can work together, pooling their knowledge, and Britain should be part of that project. We have great scientists in Britain. University of Glasgow in Scotland has one of the best centres for gravitational research in the world. I was reading at Glasgow University when I was living at the Castle of the Muses, and Scottish scientists can be involved in this. There needs to be a breakthrough. And it was at CERN that we invented the internet. Sir Tim Berners-Lee, a great British scientist. What's the next thing? Well, it's got to be some kind of alternative energy source that is non-polluting and free, or relatively free. That's my challenge to the European collective intelligentsia, the scientific community, and to the British that should be part of that. As Donne said, we're all part of the same, the same continent, the same being. Newton is a great thinker, respected in Europe. Descartes is respected in Britain. We should be thinking this thing through together. The Green parties of Europe are very well advanced. They are important in European countries, and therefore, from the environmental perspective, the sort of eco-ethic is important for internationalism. From the beginning, the Green Movement has been an internationalist thing. Petra Kelly of Germany set up Die Grünen in Germany, and with others. She worked as an intern for President Kennedy. She was a great figure. Tragically died young, but her work lives on, and we can't afford to let this Brexit nonsense, win the day. It has to be voted down by our parliamentarians. So that's where I want to finish by saying that a coalition group should come together. What I call the Rainbow Coalition. The red, the Labour Party, the intellectuals there should work with the Green Movement, the Green Party, and the Lib Dems, the yellow. Plaid Cymru, the Welsh, and the Scottish nationalists, who are a Tartan people. I would say even the DUP are now becoming a Remain party, and certainly Sinn Féin are. And also the new Remain, Let's Change and Remain party, they're honourable people who realise how important Brexit is. And like Sarah Wollaston and the others, they've come together to say, no, I'm putting my country ahead of my party. They deserve knighthoods, to be honest. And we should revere Pax. The point of all this is to insist that peace is the way to go. And I'm going to finish, finally, by my universal calendar of saints and sages. I just want to mention 4 other people that today, the 31st of March, is dedicated to. This is a calendar I produced when I was teaching full-time. It took me many weekends of work, and also helpers. So for each day of the year, there's 13 types of thinker, or philosopher, or sage, or saint. And each one is a column. So the Christians today, St. Benjamin. The Buddhists today, a very interesting man. I love this guy, Hsuang. Born in 602, died in 664 AD. So that's, kind of just when Bede and people were around. Buddhist monk and Chinese pilgrim who went to India. And he translated the sacred scriptures of Buddhism from Sanskrit into Chinese. And his journey, his story is unbelievable. And this is what I mean by internationalism. Somebody looking for Dharma from China, going to India, sitting in Nalanda and other academic centres and translating these scriptures, learning Sanskrit, putting them into Chinese. He founded a school in Chinese Buddhism known as the Consciousness Only School, which is called the Yogachara school in Indian Buddhism. And when I discovered that school existed when I was a young philosophy student at Bristol University in my 18th, 19th year, it was like a light suddenly went on. I'd been studying British philosophy, Berkeley, I was drawn to idealism, Hegel and stuff, but it was all taught as if, no, that's not serious philosophy. Only philosophy matters is logical positivism and cynicism, really, and pseudo-philosophy with scientific dressage. I discovered in India, in China, Yogachara hit the nail on the head and said, no, consciousness only, folks. It's your intention, it's your mind that creates the reality, and not the other way round. And so by going for enlightenment, we help co-create a much more beautiful and harmonious place. And that's why I became a Buddhist at the age of 19 and affirmed that tradition. He translated these Buddhist sutras. He travelled throughout Central Asia and India, and he gave very precise diaries of his journeys and travels, which have been great value to historians and archaeologists ever since. And he came back to China in 647 with all these Buddhist works. And I mean, I take my hat off to these great pioneers of thought and philosophy who've travelled and studied and have the humility to go to other countries and learn. Now, what saddens me about Brexit is it's coming from the opposite tendency. Humility is when you go and travel and you learn from other people and you study in their languages and you translate things. Well, that's what European intellectual life is about. Whereas Brexit is about, well, we're the best, we're the English, we don't even like Scots. I mean, it's so backward that it embarrasses me. In the university system of Europe, bless it, Duns Scotus from Scotland would go and travel and teach in Paris. Michael Scott, the great philosopher wizard, would go and teach in Sicily. And Thomas Aquinas, the great Italian from Naples, he would come and teach in Paris and Cologne and so on. This is what the right to remain in Europe is. It's about the right to remain part of that pan-European intellectual project so that we can produce future generations of Hsuangs who can then go out there and study ultimate truth in different cultures. For Hinduism today, we have Mahatma Gandhi. And, it's a big one because Gandhi and I go back a long way. I've revered and studied Gandhian thought and action for many years. I was the coordinator of the School of Nonviolence for the Gandhi Foundation in the 1990s, working from Kingsley Hall, which is where Gandhi lived when he was in London in 1931. I've been to the Gandhian ashrams in India and studied Gandhi studies, really, quite a lot as a scholar of peace and non-violence. Obviously, he's one of the big ones. Gandhi came to London and he studied at the University of London, where my degrees are from. He studied law, but he was an omnivore. He wanted to study everything, like me, and he was fascinated by metaphysics and philosophy, and he got involved in the Theosophical Society. He met Blavatsky, and he loved theosophy, because here were Westerners saying that Indian philosophy was important. And he, brought up in India, had been sent to study Western philosophy because only Western thought was important. It hit him like a bombshell that, hang on, they're both important. We need Western knowledge, law, etc., science, and Eastern spirituality and metaphysics. And he realised that actually we need one world in which the best aspects of West and East will merge into one praxis of peace and non-violence. And that's why he then went to South Africa and opposed racism and the apartheid, proto-apartheid system. He was thrown off a train, as Attenborough's film makes clear, and I knew Lord Attenborough reasonably well. He was on the Gandhi Foundation, he was our president for many years, and he would come to meetings at Kingsley Hall, and I met him in Parliament as well. And he made the film Gandhi to say to the world, look, there was this guy who challenged the might of the British Empire and all its ignorance and hubris and arrogance, which did that massacre in Amritsar against the unarmed Sikhs, presented in that film terribly well, but it's horrifying. And that is the kind of imperial idiot that's behind Brexit. The people at the top echelons of the Tory party are like that General Dwyer. They think they can shoot the unarmed masses of the people and get away with it. They think they can, I don't know, they want to go back to some kind of imperialist kind of fantasy land, living in their manor houses in whatever, Surrey or something. And they can go on running the world. I mean, no, sorry, history's moved on. We had Gandhi come, and he brought you down, my dear friends, with the power of love and non-violence, which is all I have too. You know, Brexit is a nightmare cooked up by the neo-imperialists that bullied the Indian people into, you know, ultimately not having enough belief in themselves. But India's grown up, and I love going back to India. I've been 10 times. You know, I've been to many conferences on non-violence with the Gandhian tradition. I've met people that knew Gandhi and worked with him. And what we need is a world based on non-violence, not a world based on violence and imperialism. And Brexit is, I'm afraid, you know, an imperialist nightmare and nonsense based on militarism and violence, cooked up jointly by American neo-imperialists who've given us Desert Storm, the Gulf War, and the attack on Iraq, and probably were involved in fake attacks on 9/11, you know, suspend judgment on that one when I'm doing the research. It's a nightmare of violence that's been created, and the Gandhian ethics says enough is enough is enough. We want love and peace, folks, and we want it scientifically. The thing about Gandhi is, in his biography, autobiography, An Experiment with Truth, he says, look, you know, this is just one life. I'm trying to get peace and non-violence. I'm continuing that story. My life is just another experiment with truth, as are all of our lives. But let's get experimenting on the right experiment, which is how to create peace and non-violence. And Indians love Europe. Indians, you know, are friendly. They come over all the time. I've got a yoga teacher coming here in a few weeks' time, and you know, Europe and India are old friends. They're old buddies. I have a book about Indian and European philosophy, and we've been learning from Indians for a very long time. Piro of Ellis went with the expedition of Alexander to India and met Jains, who brought skepticism to the West. So the skeptical philosophy of academic discourse, which I practice, is ultimately also in harmony with the Jain idea of suspension of judgment. We call it epoche in European philosophy. The Jains call it anikantavada. Reality is so complex, it has so many multi-dimensionalities about it, that we can never know the absolute wholeness of everything from all angles simultaneously. And therefore we should be peaceful in ourselves, reach a state of calmness, like a sort of Kantian, you know, surrender to the not knowingness of the absolute, but then a love for the absolute, because our minds can't cope with the complexity of it, but our hearts can love the complexity behind it all. So yes, India and Europe should be together, and Britain is part of that. Britain is part of that conversation of discourse between Europeans and Indians. And so was France. Anquetil Duperron, great translator of French, you know, discovered Indian classics and translated the Zoroastrian scriptures from Parsis in Bombay for the first time. These are Zoroaster's Gathas. And the French Orientalists are amazing. People like Alexander David Neal, who went to Tibet and studied oral traditions. You know, the European Oriental tradition as a whole, expressing love for India, should be affirmed. It's part of what the European Union can do. We have a European-Indian interlink, a conference that takes place, and at a very high level there's trade agreements and so on going on. Britain shouldn't be excluded and left out, and shouldn't go down this hubristic route thinking, oh, we're going to be an independent great nation and make treaties with India and stuff. Grow up. It's not going to happen, because Scotland's going to leave, Ireland's going to break apart from the UK, and you know, it's just a fantasy land. So please, let's do Remain. I want to also mention Marie Curie today. She's mentioned as a great physicist, 1867 to 1934. And she was from Paris, obviously, Polish, French, Jewish. All three very happy to be. Thank you very much. Simultaneous multiple identities. That's what I've talked about in these lectures before. She's an example. And then we have Sir James Fraser, the great anthropologist. He's celebrated in the column. A Scotsman from Helensburgh, near where I used to live, near Glasgow, and a great local lad. He went to Cambridge, studied anthropology, became interested in all the tribe customs, wrote the famous book The Golden Bough on the nature of magic, which I remember trying to read properly when I was 11. And I've always loved Fraser. He's a polymath, he's a genius. And this Golden Bough is a custom in ancient Rome that to be, the Druid king or the chief priest of the mysteries, you would be in this by this lake, and a contender had to come along. It's all gripping stuff. The Golden Bough is actually what you take to go down into the underworld, and so Fraser was interested in customs about immortality and death and sacrifice and he's not. Most anthropologists, academics don't like him now because he was too big a thinker. They like to just do their one little bit of research and that's it. Well, with all due respect, that's great. Do your specialist stuff, do your PhD, but then also do the interlinkage. Connect your bit of specialist knowledge with this bit and that bit and that bit. That's what the Green University is for, Work with us. And we need to get this continent reconnected into a song of beauty for mankind, and that's what knowledge should be like a form of poetry. And I'm going to finish with a quote from another poet who I love, who also is connected with this day. He was born on this day, 31st of March 1621. And he was another great love poet. He wrote a famous poem called To His Coy Mistress in 1650. Had we but world enough and time, this coyness lady were no crime. We would sit down and think which way to walk and pass our long love's day. And it goes on. I would like to live in a civilization which devotes as much energy to love poetry as to nuclear weapons. In fact, much more. I also want to finish finally by saying that on this day, 31st of March, in ancient Rome, it was the eve of the festival tomorrow, known as Venus Verticordia, Venus the changer of hearts. I love that, because Venus, the goddess of love, or Aphrodite, is the power that can change hearts. And I'm praying that all those people that voted Brexit will realise that love, Venus, is saying to them, please change your hearts. And there was a famous poem about this day called the Per Vigilium Veneris, which has a refrain: tomorrow let him love, he who has never loved, and he who has loved, tomorrow let him love. You can read the whole thing. So that's really my ending, is through the power of love, through our love of nature, of culture, of civilization, we need to have a second chance to affirm our connections with Europe, for all the reasons I've been giving. And let's hope this week, that tomorrow, even Monday, that our parliamentarians do the right thing and organise for a second referendum and a general election, as I say, should be on the same day. Much easier. Thank you so much for listening, and may the gods be with you.